So on this episode, I'm going to share with you my dumbest move of this young fantasy football season. So stay tuned and listen to this episode of Go There on Fourth. Welcome to Go There on Fourth, Tuesday edition, where I recap my picks from week 3. This is a Christian podcast for those who love football, fantasy football, and are followers of Jesus or curious about following Jesus. I'm Pastor Jason Barnett, a.k.a. the Dirt Path Pastor. And for the record, I am not a football expert. I am just a football junkie, and I'm just sharing with you my struggles as a fantasy football player, and maybe give me some pointers along the way, good or bad. This week was not a good week for me, whether it came to game picks or my pick for my fantasy football team. So I'll give you some advice, but whether the advice is good or not, I'll leave that up to you. So this is a Tuesday edition, so let me run it back to you, my picks from week 3. We're going to start off by looking at the Thursday night early Sunday games. I started the week at 17-14 on the season for my picks. So, like I said, I didn't do very good, though. So let's just jump right in. Steelers versus the Browns. I picked the Steelers to win, and Pickens had an incredible catch last week. That was an amazing game, amazing catch. But I saw a Facebook meme today that explained that, the Steelers receivers are having to make these amazing catches because of Trubisky at quarterback. Whether that's true or not, I've watched two of the Steelers games so far, and Trubisky's had his moments, but Steelers did not win. The Browns won that one. Texans versus the Bears. I picked the Bears to win, and the Bears won. And Herbert is the one who made me look like an idiot. He scores 2 touchdowns, and I'll explain why he made me look like an idiot this week. It was my worst fantasy football moment of the season so far. But I'll get to that here in a little bit. But yes, I picked the Bears to win, so I got one right. Yay for me. Raiders versus the Titans. I picked the Raiders to win because surely they've had 2 other close games so far. This is going to be the week. The Titans have been struggling all season long. So I just kind of felt like, maybe the Raiders, this would be the week they're out. They'll get over the hump. They'll get the win. And Hollins, he had a monster game. And if you're looking for a receiver in your free agency, I know he's available in our 12-team league. But maybe go check out for Hollins in the free agency. Hopefully you're at the top of your waiver wire and you can find him there. But even though Hollins had a monster game, Derrick Henry was the monster that we all know him to be at running back. So the Titans won that one, so I got that pick wrong. Chiefs versus the Colts, and like I always say, I'm a Colts fan through and through. I will pick the Colts to win, even probably when I shouldn't. And this is one of those weeks where I picked the Colts to win, mainly because I'm a Colts fan, not because I actually believe they were going to win, but I picked them out of obligation to my favorite team, and I got it right. I got it right. My faith was rewarded. What was really cool about the Colts getting this win was how they did it. The game-winning touchdown goes to Jelani Woods, our rookie tight end. And I saw a Facebook story today sharing that Jelani Woods grew up a Falcons fan and watching Matt Ryan play for the Falcons. And so, as he was playing in the backyard with his friends and that he just always pretended and dreamed of catching a game-winning touchdown from Matt Ryan, and he got to live out his dream. So I thought that was so cool. On top of my Colts getting a W for the season. So go Colts, go Shoe. Oh, awesome. Bills versus the Dolphins. And if you've been following this podcast at all, I've been really high and excited about the Dolphins this year. But this week I didn't feel excited about them. I thought this was the week where they were going to drop one because they're going against the Bills, and the Bills have looked like a runaway freight train this season, both on offense and defense. And the defense played lights out again for the most part. And again, I'll explain that a little bit later, how that impacted me. But So I picked the Bills to win, but the Dolphins were able to pull this one out in the end. If you've seen the video so far, Ken Dorsey, the offensive coordinator for the Bills, reminds us to pay attention to who is watching you, or to make sure there's no cameras that could be on you in that moment, because you never know who's paying attention or who is watching and how that will come back and bite you. And that's exactly what happened to him when he got angry at the end of that game for how things went down. So anyway, Lions versus the Vikings. I picked the Lions to win this one. Again, I like the Lions with Coach Campbell. I think they play hard. I think that he's developing the identity of having grit and toughness. So I picked the Lions to win this one against the Vikings because, again, the Vikings, they're that team that gets you excited only to break your heart at random points of the season. And after the way Kirk Cousins kept trying to throw the ball to Darius Slade last week, I thought, well, maybe this is the beginning of that turning point for the Vikings this season. It just happened a little earlier, but I was wrong. Cousins threw for 260 yards, 2 touchdowns, and one of those was in the last minute to win the game. So, again, I missed this one, but, again, I don't feel like I missed this one by that much. Ravens versus the Patriots. I picked the Ravens to win. The Ravens won. If you have Mac Jones as your quarterback, which only 12% of people in ESPN leagues have him rostered, well, this is probably time to cut him and look for somebody else. So just as a heads up, Mac Jones got hurt, and it looks like it may be a significant injury. But if you're looking for a quarterback, Brian Hoyer, he's kind of bounced around the league, but occasionally he has a good game here or there. So he may be worth picking up and stashing on your bench. But anyway, the quarterback that did have a good game was Lamar Jackson. I just want to say Lamar Jackson is playing his tail off for his agent in hopes to get that max contract. And for those that don't know, Lamar Jackson is his own agent. So anyway, I picked the Ravens to win, and the Ravens won. Woo! Bengals versus the Jets. I picked the Jets to win this one. And if you've ever had those times where you wish you could take something back because you're not quite sure why you made that decision in the moment, but you did, this is that one for me. I'm not sure why I picked the Jets to win. Maybe it's because they're at home. Maybe it's because they came from behind and beat the Browns. But I guess I was overlooking the fact that they had just beat the Browns. So I don't know what I was thinking there. And maybe it's just the Bengals have looked so bad this season. But Jets for the cure to the Bengals' bad start so far. So anyway, Bengals won that one, so I got that one wrong. Eagles versus the Commanders. And I've been saying the Commanders are about to enjoy the roller coaster ride of Carson Wentz at quarterback. And the Eagles have, they are away from that train. They're off that roller coaster. And the Eagles right now are looking like the team to beat in the NFC East. And Hurts threw for 340 yards, 2 touchdowns. So I picked the Eagles to win. The Eagles won that one. But the Eagles, man, they look awesome. So I'm not going to be shocked to see them win the division this year. I know the season's still early. There's still a long way to go. A lot could happen, but still, that's where I'm at. That's the excitement that I have. All right. Saints versus the Panthers. I picked the Saints to win this one. I felt like the Saints came out, they lost that close game to the the Buccaneers and Tom Brady. So I thought, well, the way the defense is playing, surely they'll bounce back against the Panthers. They didn't. The Saints actually had 3 turnovers, which that doesn't help when you're playing against anybody. Even the Panthers could take advantage of that. So Saints picked up that win, or the Panthers picked up that win, so I got that one wrong. So for the Thursday night, early Sunday games, I went 4-6. That was a subpar effort in those early games. Kind of what happened is I got attached to the wild card teams, and it came back to bite me later. I got a little too fancy, too bold for my own britches. So maybe I'll be a little more reserved this week, all right? All right. Well, like I said, this is a Christian podcast on faith and faith, football, and fantasy football. And I kind of throw in a devotional here as a part of this to spend some time in God's Word and talk about the Word of God together. And today's devotional is I'm going to look in Luke chapter 9. I'm rereading verses 43 through 45. And when I'm picking up in verse 43, I'm actually picking up in the second sentence or the second part of verse 43 here. And it's kind of a conversation that Jesus is having with his disciples. But one of the things you'll hear when you're going through school, when you're going through job training that requires listening, is the term active listening. Active listening is a type of listening where you're not just hearing words, hearing sounds go into your brain, but the sounds are making connections with your brain, igniting the way you think, engaging you as a person. So you are engaged in the conversation. You're engaged in the presentation that takes place. That's what active listening is. And one of the signs that we are actively listening is when we ask questions. And questions are what come about when we are engaged, right? When we're listening to a lecture, when we're listening to someone in conversation, it's going to create questions in our minds at times because we either we like more information, or it piques our curiosity in spots. So asking questions is a sign of active listening. So as we read this passage, that idea of active listening kind of plays a factor here. So in Luke chapter 9, verse 43 through 45, so it says, while everyone was amazed at all the things Jesus was doing, Jesus told his disciples, let these words sink in. The Son of Man is about to be betrayed into the hands of men. If they did not understand this statement, it was concealed from them so that they could not grasp it. And they were afraid to ask him about it. So Jesus here is referring, when he's talking about the Son of Man, Jesus is referring to himself. The Son of Man is really Jesus' favorite title for himself. As followers of Christ and as Christians, we believe that Jesus is fully human, but he's also fully God. So one of his titles is the Son of God, the Messiah, the Savior. But the title that Jesus uses most for himself is the Son of Man. So that's a kind of an interesting thing to think about and point out here. It doesn't really pay a whole big factor in, but when Jesus is saying the Son of Man is about to be betrayed, Jesus is telling his disciples, hey, I'm about to be betrayed into the hands of people. They're going to take me. So he's telling the disciples exactly what's going to happen. This is where the idea of active listening comes in. But verse 45 tells us, but they did not understand this statement. The disciples very clearly hear the words that Jesus said because they're able to recount this incident later on when the writer of this gospel, the Gospel of Luke, when Luke is questioning them, and so if you read the similar account in some of the other Gospels, it's very clear the disciples remember this conversation and remember what happened. So they hear the words of Jesus very clearly. And it goes on in 45, it says, but they did not understand this statement. It was concealed from them so that they could not grasp it. So that they can clearly hear the words of Jesus, but it's very clear from the text that they don't understand what they mean. It doesn't make sense to them because remember, what the Jews believed at this time, they believed that there was going to be a Messiah that would come. But what they believed was that Messiah was going to come and free them from the Romans and set up a kingdom much in the same sense that David was going to, that David did back in the Old Testament. So that's what they believed at this point in time. That's what they were expecting to happen. So when Jesus drops this phrase on them, and this is the second time he says it, but when Jesus says the Son of Man is about to be betrayed into the hands of men, they are not expecting him to say that because Jesus has not set up this earthly kingdom yet. They haven't been freed from the Romans. So they have no clue what Jesus is talking about. It's outside of what they've always believed, what they've always been taught. So the disciples hear this, and they don't understand what Jesus is saying. Now, what's interesting in Luke here, it says it was concealed from them so that they could not grasp it. So Jesus said this knowing that the disciples weren't going to understand what he was saying. He said this to them knowing that in their hearts and in the minds of his disciples, that when he makes the statement that the Son of Man is going to be betrayed into the hands of men, he knows that it's going to create questions in their hearts and their minds because it's going up against what they've always been taught. It was concealed from them. Now Jesus is not being mean to the disciples here. God's not being mean to the disciples, playing tricks and playing games with them. What Jesus is doing is he is sharing this statement in hopes that his disciples would recognize the discrepancy between what they believe and what Jesus, God in the flesh, is telling them. What God in the flesh is telling them is that he's going to come and he's going to be betrayed into the hands of men. And what the disciples believed was that the Messiah was going to come and defeat the Romans and set the kingdom like the history of God's people knew in the past. And when Jesus is very clearly telling the disciples that's not what's going to happen, but he was going to be betrayed, Jesus shared that not to be mean, not to confuse them, but in hopes that the disciples, knowing him, trusting him, and believing in who he is, that they would ask Jesus about what he meant here. It was the truth in this moment was concealed, and the disciples didn't understand it because God wanted the disciples to ask him. It was an encouragement to ask. You see, God, Jesus, is not afraid of questions. Remember, he tells us that unless we become like little children, that's the idea behind little children. It's not the idea behind little children isn't a blind faith. It's a faith that believes despite having questions and is unafraid to ask those questions. But what stops the disciples from asking that question is they were afraid to ask Jesus about it. Fear stopped the disciples from gaining the understanding that they needed to get what Jesus was saying. And there's probably all kinds of reasons why the disciples would be afraid to know. One, they were probably afraid to ask the question because they didn't want to look stupid, right? They didn't want to ask because they didn't want to get called out for being ignorant. They didn't ask the question maybe because they were afraid to learn the truth. Maybe they wanted to believe that the Messiah was going to free them from the Romans and establish a kingdom like David's. And so maybe by asking that question and they were afraid they were going to get an answer that they didn't want. Whatever the reason, it was fear that kept them from gaining the knowledge that they wanted, that their minds were asking themselves. Because the text makes it very clear. It makes it very clear that they understood, they heard the words of Jesus. It makes it very clear that they didn't understand the words of Jesus, and that the disciples knew that they should ask Jesus about it, but they don't because they were afraid. So what's this mean for you and me? It means fear can rob you and me of understanding, and it can rob us of instruction. Right? If there's things about God, things about life that we don't understand, then you and I, as children of God, as followers of Jesus, if we are truly like little children, it doesn't mean that our questions mean we lack faith. Our questions mean that we are striving to get closer to God. We're striving to understand how our life fits into the grand scheme of following Jesus. And we're seeking to understand how those things fit together and how to live a holy and a life pleasing to God, following his will in a world full of sin, surrounded and offered sinful choices. We're trying to figure out how to live this life without sinning, surrounded by it. And so it doesn't make sense to us. And so if we wanted to gain understanding, we need to be brave enough to ask God the questions that are bothering us. Remember, God's not afraid of our questions. He wants us to help us understand. He wants us to help grow closer to him. He wants to help us walk and live a holy life that he's called us to, but we have to be willing to ask. Another thing that fear robs us of is instructions, right? God might be calling us to do something, or we may work, at our job sometimes. We may not understand what to do, and when we don't understand what to do at our job, what do? We ask questions. We seek instruction on how to do it correctly, because let's face it. It's better to ask questions and seek instruction than it is to do it wrong and get in trouble and potentially fired for doing it the wrong way. So fear that keeps us from asking questions can rob us of getting instruction on how to do something correctly or more productively. And sometimes we have to be willing to let go of the fear that we might have to change something about ourselves. We have to be willing to submit to the instruction that we receive, accept the knowledge that we've been given. So you and I, we have to be brave enough to ask questions. But not only do we have to be brave enough to ask questions, we have to be wise enough to hear the answers. We have to be actively listening, and actively listening means that we take the things that we hear, we take the understanding that we gain, we take the instruction we receive, and we live it out practically in our lives. When we don't understand, when we need instruction, we ask the questions. But then we have the wisdom to live with the gained knowledge. and to live out the instructions that we're given. All right, well, hey, if you enjoyed that devotional, I encourage you to check out ravnaz.com. Ravenna Church of the Nazarene is where I pastor at. We're located at 530 Main Street in Ravenna, Kentucky. Our services start Sunday mornings at 11 a.m. And I would love to have you. If you can't make it, you can be sure to check out my other podcast, the past sermon podcast, and my weekly sermons are uploaded to that podcast there. Let's continue on with our picks for this week, or from week 3 recap. Okay, week three recap on my picks. The Sunday late games, Jaguars versus the Chargers. I picked the Chargers to win this one, and let's just be honest, no one at this point probably expected the Jaguars to be leading the AFC South. I thought maybe we would see some improvement for Trevor Lawrence, mainly because of the coaching change. You know, Doug Peterson is a solid coach. He got a lot out of Carson Wentz, and when Carson Wentz went down, he was still able to get the most out of Nick Foles in that quarterback position, and help the Eagles to win a championship. So he's a Super Bowl winning coach. I just thought it would take him some more time to use the pieces that are in Jacksonville and to kind of undo some of the past mistakes from the previous coaching staff. But boy, have I been wrong? And the Jaguars are leading the AFC South right now, and so the Jaguars won the game, and I picked the Chargers, so I got that one wrong. Rams versus the Cardinals, and I really thought last week after the Cardinals came from behind and beat the Raiders that would kind of spark something in them. Even though they were playing the Rams, even though they've struggled against the Rams, I thought, well, maybe this is the time they finally break that curse. And despite Murray throwing it 58 times in the loss, the Rams won. So I picked the Cardinals win, the Rams won that one. I got that one wrong. Falcons versus the Seahawks. I picked the Falcons. And the Falcons, they gave up some yards, but they still had 2 sacks and an interception. So their defense is still playing tough. They're still not, giving into the line that this is a throwaway season. This is a tank season. The Falcons defense is playing hard. I picked them to win, and they did. Packers versus the Buccaneers. I picked the Packers to win this one. Although this one still didn't go the way I expected. It was 2 great quarterbacks, and they're struggling with unfamiliar receivers. And they were both playing good defenses this week. I probably should have expected more of a low-scoring game. It was a low-scoring game, but in the end, I picked the Packers to win, and the Packers won. So I went 2-2 in the afternoon game. So at least I went 500, but I'm still 6-8 on the week. All right, here's my fantasy football team struggles for this week. From week 3, this is what happened. I kind of share with you some of the things I was wrestling with as I set my lineup last Thursday, and this is results of the decisions I made. I'm in a 12-team PPR league with custom scoring with church folks and friends. I was 0-2 coming into that week, and I was up against the 3rd best team in our league. I started Derek Carr at quarterback. He's been the guy. I've been rolling him every week. My backup is Justin Fields, and Justin Fields is going to remain there for a while. But Derek Carr put up 69 points. Even though the Raiders lost, he still put up some solid numbers. Austin Eckler is my running back. And this is pretty much the first week I'm pretty sure that he scored under 20 points. He only put up 18 for me. And I do have some concern with Justin Herbert being hurt over the next couple of weeks moving forward. But I don't know that's going to be enough to have me take Eckler out of the lineup. And actually might even encourage me to keep him in more. At my RB2 spot, I started Michael Carter. This was a change because of James Conner's questionable status. And I'll get to that more here in a minute. But he scored 16.8 points, and this is the first time he was under 20 points. So I don't know if, again, he's splitting carries with Hall. I don't know if I need to go back and look at the stats for this game. I'm not sure what the breakdown was between the touches for him versus Hall. I know in a little bit I watched this game. It seemed like Hall was on the field quite well most of the time I was watching. So that's just the gamble you get when you're playing a running back that splits carries with somebody else. You're just not really sure entirely who's going to get carries and when. Receiver 1, I have Tyreek Hill versus the Bills. And I'll be honest, I shared that I was concerned about Hill going against this Bills defense, and I was right for that. That concern became valid because Hill only scored me 5 points after the monster game last week. But I still feel justified living in because he's Tyreek Hill. Tyreek Hill is one of those players you don't take out unless he's hurt and not in the game. So Hill will probably still remain my receiver 1 despite the low numbers from this last week. Receiver 2, I have Deontay Johnson from the Pittsburgh Steelers, and this was his best scoring output yet with 17 points for me. And it was another game where he had 10 targets. I think he had 12 targets the first game, 11 the second, and then 10 this one. I may have the weeks mixed up, but he is getting 10-plus targets in 3 straight games. So, again, I'm still going to keep him in the starting lineup, whether I start receiver 2 or the flex spot. Deontay Johnson, even though he hasn't scored a touchdown yet, the volume of targets he's getting has me confident to keep him playing and keep him in the lineup. At tight end, I had Everett from the Chargers, and I probably jinxed myself because I said he scored 14 points in 2 straight games. And he only scored 5 this week. He was targeted 6 times, which is pretty common to what he's been getting thus far in the small sample of work that we have. But he only caught a third of those targets. He only caught 2 of the 6 targets that he had. So that was a rough week. In my flex, I had moved James Conner down to my flex spot, and my dilemma was that he was questionable and he was a game time decision. So I was very concerned, but it kind of worked out. I left him in at the flex spot. He ended up scoring 22 points for the week. And I feel like it worked out pretty decently. It could have worked out better then. Like I said, my options was option 1, I had Keenan Allen on the bench, but he was questionable too, and he ended up not playing, so it was good that I didn't put him in, even though they were playing in the same time slot. So I could have made that switch if I had to, but again, I didn't wisely because Allen didn't play. I could have went with Jamal Williams for the Lions, and he was going against the Vikings. He put up 4 points against the Vikings, and he's been having some steady, solid numbers. Him and Carter really have been putting up similar stat lines so far this season, and really Jamal Williams just scored, kind of gave himself a boost in scoring over Carter. So I think he's really worth considering as a flex if need be moving forward, or even moving into one of my running back spots should I have some problems moving forward. Even though the downside with Williams is he's splitting carries, but from what I keep reading, what I keep seeing is Williams keeps getting more of the red zone opportunities. Now, option 3, and I told you I'll tell you this later, I had Khalil Herbert Thursday in my lineup, the running back for the Bears. And I told you I made a dumb decision with him, and probably my dumbest decision of this young fantasy football season. Herbert put up 51 points, which is the highest score any running back has put up in my league this week. But I cut him Saturday night. I had him on the bench. And keep in mind, the only reason I picked him up was I was concerned about James Conner, and I was going to leave him on the bench. But more, I kind of, this is why I set my lineup on Thursdays, and I don't change it after Thursdays generally unless there's an injury. But I think that the injury kind of spooked me. And then I started feeling more confident about Conner being able to play because I kept reading all the reports. So I thought, you know what? I'm just going to roll the dice. I'm going to trust that Conner's going to play the game. Because keep in mind, I'm a pastor, so I don't have a lot of time to mess with my lineups on Sundays. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna cut Herbert because I saw that Cole Beasley had just got signed by the Buccaneers. I knew Cole Beasley wasn't going to start this week, and if he started, he wasn't going to get probably the touches and the catches that he would get had he been there at training camp. But I also know Tom Brady and the Buccaneers are down their top 3 receivers right now. So I thought because Beasley was a veteran, maybe he might be worth picking up and holding on to. And that just turned out to be a dumb decision. At least I could have cut somebody else other than Herbert to pick up Beasley. So probably what's going to happen is somebody else in my league is going to pick up Herbert this week because he was the highest scoring player and they're ahead of me in the waiver wire. So that's on me. That was just a dumb move. And I'm probably going to look back at the end of the season and think, if I had just kept Khalil Herbert, I would have been fine. Now, option 4 that I could have went with to replace Conner was Mooney from the Panthers. I didn't look up and see how many points Mooney from the Bears. I'm sorry. He was against the Texans. I didn't look up and see how many points he scored, but mainly I ended up cutting him Saturday night too, because I saw that Aguilar was available at receiver, the receiver for the Patriots. And he had a solid game last week for the Patriots. I thought, well, he might be worth stashing on the bench because my receivers really, I feel like, are my big concern right now. And I feel like with Jones being out, that actually makes Aguilar even more valuable. Because again, Brian Hoyer, he may be a backup, but he's kind of, maybe not as skilled as Ryan Fitzpatrick. But Brian Hoyer likes to toss the rock around. And he's been in that Patriots system for a few seasons now. So I could see him being really successful stepping in as a backup quarterback and maybe even being able to throw the ball a little better than what the Patriots Patriots have been doing. So, again, it's worth hanging on to. But, again, in the end, I went with Connor. And Connor scored 22 points despite, playing with an injury. So I feel pretty good about that in the end, even though I could have done better with Williams or much better with Herbert. I feel dumb. But considering the way it worked out the best way it possibly could, despite my, with factoring in my stupidity. All right, with the defense, I went with the Falcons because they were going against the Seahawks. Remember, ice cream defenses, I don't, unless you draft one of those top-tier defenses, really you can get by with just playing the matchups of the defenses that are available. And I felt like the Falcons, again, kind of are undervalued on the defensive side right now. And they are going against the Seahawks, who they have Geno Smith at quarterback. And Geno Smith did throw for 300 yards. The Falcons did give up some yards, but they added another pick and 2 more sacks in the season. And those are the things that score you points in fantasy football, sacks and interceptions. And they added some more of those. So I was very pleased with that addition, that change. My kicker, Ryan Suckup, he scored 8 points in a game that ended 14-12. So I felt like that was pretty good for my kicker. He didn't get me over 10. There were other kickers that scored higher, but it's your kicker. You don't spend a lot of time worrying about who your kicker is. Also, all right, so despite my best efforts, and maybe because as a result of my stupidity, my team dropped to 0-3 on the season. I was absolutely demolished this week. There's only one unbeaten team remaining in our fantasy league, though, so that's good. There's a lot of parity in this one, but there are 2 on this teams, and I'm one of those. So yay me, right? Yay me in this one. Let's see. Now my opponent this week is 2-1, so he has a better record than me. Obviously, he's 2-1. I'm 0-3, but the good news is he has scored fewer points than I have on the season. Not by much, but in that department, hopefully I should be able to pick up a win this week moving forward. All right. My primetime picks. 49ers versus the Broncos. I picked the Broncos to win, and the Broncos win, and Jimmy G. Wiz stepped out. He stepped out against racism, all right, and he sacrificed 2 points to do so. So applaud the effort on Jimmy G to step out against racism. Don't applaud him because it was a safety, right? And it cost him the 2 points. And in a game that ended 11-10, that's a big deal. All right. Cowboys versus the Giants. I picked the Giants to win this one, and I knew I was in trouble. I knew I was in trouble when the entire Monday Night Countdown crew picked the Giants to win. When all the experts are picking somebody to win, I generally try and abandon ship and go the other way because they're not all 100%. When they're all 100% in one direction, they're not all 100% right that often. So, yay for that. But the good news is I went down with all of them. So I guess that's good news. So I went 7-9 on this week. I'm still above 500 on the season at 24-23. How is your team doing? What matchup is concerning you this week? I would love to hear from you. I'd love to wrestle through it with you, maybe give you advice on what not to do. Be sure to tune in this Thursday as I make my week 4 picks and share my struggles with the lineup for the week. And this Thursday, we will have a special guest with us. Reverend Andy Newen, the pastor at Eastland Park Nazarene in Lexington, Kentucky, will be joining us to share a devotional and maybe share some of the things with us. So be sure to subscribe and follow this podcast and tune in for Thursday for our picks. Be sure to check out their Pastorman podcast to hear more of my sermons and things like that. And also follow me on TikTok where I do daily devotional videos. So I will catch you next time.